What's up, everybody? My name is Julius, and you're watching Medical Madness, a web series documenting the human experience playing medication roulette. A lot of people have been talking to me about antipsychotics. A lot of people have been reaching out with questions, and they haven't been specific to Vraylar, but like antipsychotics in general. And everybody seems fucking terrified. So that got me thinking, should I be worried? Should I, what's going on? What's the deal? So in this video, I'm going to be going over kind of my literature review for whether or not antipsychotics are good or bad. Are they worth it? Who needs them? Should you be taking them? Actually, no, I can't really answer that question because I'm not a fucking doctor. You can make that decision yourself. But essentially, as a literature review, I'm going to be doing a survey of what I have found out there in terms of the research. Because of course, fucking psychiatrists are going to say it's fine, it's okay. Like, don't even fucking worry about it. If you find this video helpful in any way, please like and share. It helps me know what content to produce more of. It also helps me get to know what y'all aren't feeling as well. If you have anything you want to say, have any questions, if you want to reach out, feel free to do so via social media or leave me a comment. Most importantly though, subscribe and turn on that subscription notification button so you can find out when I'm uploading new videos for series like these. All right, let's jump into it. First things first, what are antipsychotics? Antipsychotic medications specifically are used to treat those who are experiencing or who suffer from a psychotic disorder. Typically that would be schizophrenia, but you can also experience it if you suffer from bipolar disorder, specifically bipolar disorder type 1. The reality is that antipsychotics are prescribed for really anyone who is suffering from psychosis. Psychosis can happen in schizophrenia, it can happen in bipolar disorder, it can happen to anybody really. It can be drug-induced. It kind of just all depends on what's going on in here and what your unique situation is. So what is psychosis? Psychosis is not a diagnosis, but rather a medical term. Essentially, it's people who experience or who suffer or have symptoms that align with, or rather don't align with reality. So there's a disconnect between their perception of the world and what's actually happening. People suffering from psychosis might hear things that are not there, see things that are not there. Those would be hallucinations. At the same time, they might experience or feel or have beliefs that are not necessarily true. For instance, while this is extreme, when I was in psychosis back in 2017, I thought that I was like some celebrity and I was traveling around Europe, but that didn't help. Long story short, I had a warped perception of not necessarily what my personality was. It definitely changed my personality, but I had a warped perception of self in the sense that I was a normal person, a normal American backpacking through Europe, not like some celebrity on some world tour. These delusions led me to booking 5-star hotels, eating at yacht clubs, traveling every weekend, just doing whatever the hell we wanted to do and spending hella cash doing it. Essentially, psychosis is the state of being out of touch with reality. It's a very simple way to say it. And deduced from that, people can either have a psychotic episode or they can experience psychotic symptoms. So antipsychotics are meant to treat that. It's understood that antipsychotics fall within 2 categories, or you will also hear it referred to as first generation or second generation. Typical antipsychotics or first generation antipsychotics are exactly what they sound like. They're the antipsychotics that came first. They were developed in the 1950s, and they're really only used now when the newer drugs are ineffective, which from my understanding typically is not the case because the newer ones are newer and more developed and respond better with people, but everyone's different. While antipsychotics were first developed in the 1950s, they had some severe side effects. So then came along second generation antipsychotics. As it relates to second generation or atypical antipsychotics, the difference is pretty simple. They're the drugs that came later, as in they were developed after the first generation ones. These were mostly approved for use in the 1990s. And for the most part, they're what most people, I guess, start out with. They're the ones that you hear about all the time. If you're living with bipolar disorder, a lot of times, especially like in my case, these atypical antipsychotics are paired with a mood stabilizer or paired with another type of drug, or added on, I should say, added to your treatment with another drug. I've talked a little bit about the way antipsychotics work in terms of the neurotransmission and a few other of the episodes, but just for a quick recap, antipsychotics primarily work by acting on dopamine as well as serotonin. As it relates to dopamine, antipsychotics have a high affinity for many of the subtypes within the the dopamine receptors. And there are several of these subtypes, or several dopamine receptors, I should say. Essentially, the chemical structure of these antipsychotics allows them to bind to the dopamine receptors without triggering the postsynaptic binding, or rather the response to postsynaptic binding that dopamine normally would have. The idea here is that antipsychotics essentially work as a blockage, or they block dopamine, rather they block the neurotransmission of dopamine. This would be important because within schizophrenia, within bipolar disorder, within those experiencing psychosis, it's been found that excessive neurotransmission of dopamine may be responsible for some of those symptoms. The idea is that if you block dopamine, then you'll start to experience less of those psychotic symptoms. While blocking dopamine was a huge focus of first-generation antipsychotics, and while dopamine has been the primary neurotransmitter or the primary chemical that's been thought of to cause psychosis, more recently with second-generation antipsychotics, they've realized that it's not just dopamine, it's also serotonin. And that's because second-generation antipsychotics, or at least a few of the atypical second-generation antipsychotics, have had a weaker affinity for the D receptors, or the D2 receptors, that's dopamine, and have actually been potent antagonists for the serotonin receptors. So they've sort of seen like, it's not just affecting dopamine, but it also interacts with serotonin. Serotonin must also play a role in psychosis. Personally speaking, I haven't had any negative effects personally with antipsychotics, and I've been on Abilify and Vraylar, which is the one that I'm currently prescribed, but maybe or maybe not taking. I did have some weird side effects with Abilify, but they weren't severe, and the side effects were more annoying. With Abilify, I had to use the bathroom a lot, and like all the time. It was annoying. Like when I say a lot, I mean like every 20 minutes it felt like, and I wasn't even drinking water or fluids, so I don't know how the fuck I was using the bathroom. It also made me super tired, to the point where I was falling asleep at Thanksgiving dinner, or maybe it was Christmas dinner. It was somebody's dinner, and I was like gone. I did start Vraylar this year, and I did make a video on it. I didn't really experience any negative side effects. Yes, I was on it enough, or I was on it long enough, not saying I'm not on it now, but I was on it long enough to kind of know whether or not I would be experiencing side effects, if that makes sense. But essentially, I've been prescribed Vraylar since the spring of this year, so spring of 2021. Again, definitely check this out in the video that I made, but Vraylar, I believe, while it's still a second-generation antipsychotic, it's a little bit different in the sense of how it's tolerated. In terms of the side effects, it seems to be a lot better than most of the other drugs out there. But I recently came across this graphic from a guy, I believe his name is Craig Wagner. It was a graphic made in 2017, and he has a lot of stuff on onwardmentalhealth.com. Full disclosure, full warning, he is completely against antipsychotics. He's like not for them. I tried to do some research on him just to see like, is he a hack? Is he like, because sometimes you look at things and it's like, okay, this person is clearly biased, like, but from what I can see, he's done stuff with Mental Health America, or he's done stuff with National Alliance on Mental Illness. I think he was like a guest speaker. From my vetting, like, I don't think these organizations would host somebody who's a whack job. So nonetheless, this graphic was pretty concerning. As you can see, it talks about how antipsychotics contribute, as they're typically paired with something else, especially with those with bipolar disorder. He talks about how they can shrink the brain. He talks about how nearly half the people who take them don't have a good response to them. More seriously though, he talks about how they are linked to functional impairment, sexual dysfunction, risk of weight gain, which I know to be true because I've had friends experiencing weight gain, and I've experienced weight gain. I guess and it might not look like it, but like that's a whole reason why it's, never mind. Experiencing weight gain, he says people who are on it are less likely to be employed. I can't count anymore. And then he also talks about how people who are on antipsychotics are twice as likely to experience like a cardiac symptoms or cardiac arrest symptoms, or I guess cardiac arrest, is that a fucking heart failure or like a heart attack? Regardless, it does not sound pleasant. Caveat to what I just said, I believe he's specifically referring to elderly people taking the medicine, but nonetheless, I mean, essentially he kind of holds the same belief that I do. That antipsychotics have multiple side effects, they're overprescribed. Not only do they have multiple side effects, all of these drugs have side effects. They have multiple like severe, documented over and over again side effects. And there's little research around their proven efficacy. There's little research around like, do we need to be prescribing these for people, at least people with bipolar disorder? And because of that, they should be restricted to a minimum, which is like not what they're doing. They're actually ramping up the number of people who are prescribed on them. So that's what kind of brought me to wanting to look into this. But before we jump into any more of the negatives, let's look at the positives, or what they say the positives are, and let's try to understand why they're used in the first place, because it's FDA approved, or at least Vraylar, Seroquel, I believe Abilify, they're all FDA approved. So, you know, if you have faith in your government, faith in your country, then they have to be of some use, some safety. Like let's look at this.